computer. All right, cool. So we have another client interview, testimonial, and case study with another beautiful, amazing human being that I've had the honor to kind of guide through this journey and co-create this transformation. But she decided to step through this door of expansion and open her heart in this last 6 months. So, Krysta, why don't you introduce yourself? Just let people know what you do, where you're kind of at right now in business and life, and then we'll kind of get through some questions of, yeah, kind of where you were and where you're at now.
Perfect. Well, I love how you said that. I think that really like sums up the experience so well because I think anybody can like pour into a self development or like transformational kind of experience in theory, but they have to take that responsibility to like step through and take ownership of everything. And you've really helped me do that, and I have the utmost confidence that I can continue to do that for myself, whereas in the past, other methods and approaches that I've tried that I'm sure we'll get into, I didn't really walk away from the experience feeling as confident in that. But I am a nutrition coach and I work with women to really help them see that you don't have to sacrifice everything about yourself in order to be the best version of whatever role you're playing in life. Mom, sister, employee, friend, whatever it is. And there is this culture around the idea that women are expected to be everything to everybody. And I myself feel like I fell into that trap. And it is a big reason why I actually chose to work with you for sure and work
Yep.
through that narrative and like rework that narrative and change what that actually looks like in my life, which has ultimately allowed me to be a better leader for my clients because I'm embodying the advice that I'm trying to give them on a daily basis and getting them to see that you do have the time specifically for yourself, and you taking care of you shouldn't mean that you're losing other areas of your life, so to speak, or thinking that you're inadequate in other areas for the sake of taking care of yourself. And I had to experience that myself, I think, in some difficult ways to really understand just how important that message is. And I've gotten clear on that message over the course of the last 6 months of us working together.
Yeah, and that was beautifully articulated too of, and we'll get deeper into this of how your work on yourself has translated into the work with your clients. And so if you're a coach as well or entrepreneur, this case study and interview will definitely hit home in understanding how coming back to yourself is actually going to allow you to deepen the work that you do with your clients. And it kind of just happens out of you doing the work, right? It's kind of just a byproduct of like, oh yeah, because I'm doing all of this, I start seeing how I can help my clients experience the same things or integrate the same lessons that I'm having. So now, before we go into that, kind of just give some context of where you were at before we even started working together for people to kind of get a sense. And you can also talk about like how the beginning of it was, kind of just where you're at. So maybe if someone is in the same situation, they can relate with where you were starting at.
Sure. So I had a few different areas of my life that kind of changed all at once. And this started about a year ago, actually. So I will say, to preface this, there was about 6 months of me navigating different life events on my own. And with the support of a business coach, also having my own nutrition coach, I had a lot of support around me. But I had gone through various periods with work professionally changing quite a bit. If anybody is a coach in the fitness space in particular and listening to this, we could take this all the way back to the pandemic and gyms closing. And I had kind of like a double whammy, we can call it, of at that time, not only quitting my job to then not really know what I plan to do next, but also walked away from a 4-year relationship where I was engaged, about to get married, and realized I was not with the right person. And I just kind of had that moment of like, what do I want to do next? So I was at a crossroads in both my professional life and my personal life, considering going back into more of a typical corporate job. I had started out of college in finance and then found my way into fitness because I just did not want to sit behind a desk. And fast forward to these last 4 years in between, I went through periods of being unsure if the entrepreneurial path would work for me in the fitness space specifically, but I've known for a long time that I would be happiest working for myself. I just
Yeah.
couldn't quite figure out what that would actually look like. And fast forward to about 2 years ago, went back into the fitness space, working in person, had moved from North Carolina back to New Jersey, where my family is and where I now am today. And I kind of knew that that in person training position would still be temporary and let's call it like a means to an end.
Yeah.
And would say 80%, we'll call it like 80/20, was still pouring into getting my online coaching business, what is now the Fitness Fix, off the ground. And by right around this time last year, I was actually let go from that training job. It was a surprise, it was very unexpected. And I was at a point where financially I felt comfortable enough that if I were to leave that job the next day, I would be okay. But there was just this piece of me that wasn't like fully ready to take that leap. And part of it was because there were connections to clients that were then becoming a part of my nutrition business. So I had a lot of logic behind why I wanted to do both. But if I was really honest about how I felt, I was not practicing a single thing that I preach to our clients inside of the Fitness Fix community. I was barely working out. I had gained like 25 plus pounds in a way that felt like it just happened overnight, but I knew
Mm.
exactly why. I was being very reactive with my own nutrition. I was in this mindset of like the only way I can make more success for myself financially is by working more and more and more and just constantly being on the go. If I could think back to like the very first conversation that you and I had, something you helped me uncover right away is just this like go, go, go mindset is the way that I've been living my entire life. And it was a bit of a double edged sword because I was reaping the benefits of working hard and being able to see that. But it came down to this question of like, at what cost? So that was kind of going on for like the back half of 2023 from a professional side of things.
Yeah.
And I was also at a point in my life where I found myself really questioning what I wanted inside of relationships and not sure if I was pursuing the right relationships, and also just kind of feeling like I never took the time to get really clear on what I wanted post ending my engagement. Like I knew that wasn't the person for me, but what I also realized very quickly in our first few sessions together was I hadn't actually taken the time to define what I was looking for. And so that was making it hard for me to navigate dating and finding myself spending time with people that maybe weren't necessarily aligned with what I wanted, and me really trying to figure out how to communicate that. So those two things kind of like came to a head at the same time come like December of 2023. I think in really like reflecting on, hey, we're going into a new year and this will be the first full year of me pursuing entrepreneurship like fully 100% working for
Mm.
myself.
Yep.
I wanted to set myself up in a way that I knew that I felt good about what I was doing. And I honestly felt really disconnected from myself. Like, even though I loved my clients and loved them and my community and everything we were building, I had these moments of one feeling kind of lonely, especially with the transition of no longer working in a training environment in person. That really started to hit me, coupled with the fact that I started playing the comparison game. You see other people on social media, they're getting engaged, buying houses, starting families. And for me, one, I wasn't even sure if those were things I necessarily wanted. But two, they also felt so far away that I was actually discrediting all of the accomplishments that I have made for myself over the course of the last 4 years and how different my life really looks. And I wouldn't change that for anything. But I just knew that on like a day to day basis, I was trying to get myself kind of lost in my work and not actually create the life that I wanted, to the point where you've made me question, like, what are you doing all of this for? Like, okay, great. Like, this was probably about 3 months into us working together. But I think at one point you had asked me, like, okay, let's say you doubled your revenue or something tomorrow, and everything was like totally status quo on the business side of things. Then what? Like, what else are you looking forward to? What else in your life are you excited about? Like, chances are you would still feel kind of disconnected or empty or whatever word you want to use because you're not pouring into those other aspects of your life. So ultimately, giving myself permission to act to do those things was really important, because I think if I didn't have your support, I would have kind of like continued feeling this way and convincing myself that the only thing that would quote unquote make me feel better was constantly pouring into my business.
Yes. Yeah. And thank you for giving context too of like all the things that kind of came to this like pivotal moment of everything kind of hitting together, both the relationship side, the personal side, and how, right, your business doesn't pour into you if you're not pouring into you. You pour
Mm-hmm.
into you, and that pours into your business. And so, for any of the business owners out there, coaches who coach people, lead people, give their time and their energy, and they're not present and connected with themselves, that's going to be the coping mechanism, right? Your performance, how much time you can put into your business, and what you're reaping from that. But as we talked about, right? What if it doubled? What if it was the your biggest business you ever had? Like, are you still gonna feel the way you're feeling now once that's normalized? Because everything, no matter what, externally can become normalized. Right? You can have all the money in the world, but at some point that becomes normal. You have to sit again with your own self. Be like, what meaning do I want to create for me? What do I actually want?
Mm-hmm.
Who am I? What the heck?
Yeah.
Outside of my business, right? So talk a little bit too about what you've done before, like working with coaches or therapists, because I think that's important too for people who have maybe worked with a coach or worked with a therapist and have had that experience before coming into this container.
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked this question, because it's the biggest reason why I would not shut up about coaching with you if somebody asked me, like, what tools and resources do you feel like have really helped you as a person and like this whole self-development space, right? It's become like such a buzzword, and there's so many different approaches that you can take, and it's great that there's a lot of tools at your fingertips, but it's like, how do you actually figure out what the best one is for you? And a lot of times that could be trial and error. I think in your case, a lot of it is also referrals. And the way that we connected was through a friend that she knew personally what I was going through. She also is in the same space. So she could understand a lot of the things that I was feeling and worrying about on a day to day basis that honestly, like, I have a hard time connecting with some of my other friends on, because they just don't. When you're not an entrepreneur, the same things don't keep you up at night. And that's okay. It's just that you have a different experience.
Yeah.
So when I think back to other tools that I've tried to really like be more connected to me and figure out who I am, I did a lot of traditional cognitive behavioral therapy. Talk therapy is usually like the more colloquial way that people refer to it. And a lot of it was very dependent on the relationship that I had with the therapist. But what I found was some really positive experiences and some really, really negative experiences. But the common thread and the big differentiator between the work that I did with them versus what you and I do together is I've really felt like the actual sessions that we have, whether we are, speaking about something that is on my mind or going through some sort of meditative practice, I can actually carry those tools into the rest of my routine. Whereas the support I was getting from a therapist, it was just like in this little box of the session we had. And sometimes they would be like, oh, why don't you try yoga? Or why don't you try breath work? If those things weren't happening inside of the session, I didn't feel like there was a lot of accountability for me to pursue doing them, especially when at certain times, like with the experiences that I had in leaving, moving, quitting a job, and ending a relationship all at the same time, I went into a very depressed state. And trying to convince me to do certain activities at that time felt like such a huge task when there were certain days where it really truly felt tough to get out of bed.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest difference that I've seen with this that I wish I had at that time of going through that is the conversations that I was having with those therapists. We weren't really talking about my emotions and how I actually felt in my body. We were just talking about what was going on inside of my head. And I was just repeating like every thought I was having and wasn't necessarily coming up with a way to either one, pull me out of that rumination and feedback loop, or two, what I've learned from conversations with you and like really reflecting on the whole 6 months is actually just letting myself feel those feelings. Like I was trying so hard to just talk through them so that I wouldn't actually feel them. And the more I pushed them down, they never resolved themselves. And that's what led me to kind of question, is this type of therapy or practice really effective, when I didn't necessarily walk away from it being like, yes, I have this like solution. And I also feel that inside of your container, the thought process that I've been able to come to is I do already have the answers. And it's just a matter of like recognizing that and somebody pushing you to say, "Hey, like if I say I don't know, you're going to say to me, "No, you do know. Let's just like go a little bit deeper on this." I never had any kind of therapist talk to me in that sort of way. In addition to that, I will also say, just talk, like I alluded to this in saying I've had other types of coaches and still do. Something else that I think has just been really nice about this in tandem with also having a nutrition coach is I'm able to have certain conversations about my emotions and what I'm feeling and thinking with you, and then actually talk through it with this second coach to then get more perspective on like, okay, well, what are the tangibles of prepping your meals? Why are they not happening? What's causing you to skip the gym? And like really connecting to the feeling and the why has actually allowed me to just have so much more ease in my routine. Like a year ago, I kept thinking like, how am I going to do all these things? Like it's just too hard. So of course the thing that's going to give is me taking care of my own health and fitness. Whereas now I can wake up and say, I'm going to go to the gym first thing in the morning because I know that I will be more productive for the rest of my day. I'll be in a better mood for the rest of my day by actually doing that. And I've gotten efficient too. If like I just this morning when I went to the gym, I spent some of the time on the treadmill answering DMs, and I'm good with using my time that way to be
Nice.
able to acknowledge that I can do both. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Now, sometimes I don't want to be on my phone because I think that's the other big thing that we've really uncovered in trying to figure out what allows you to be present, how being so tied to an online business and feeling like your phone is such a big part of it, but then trying to find those boundaries too. That's something we've worked on as well. But it's like, it's these little tools or these little hacks. I don't want to call them like hacks or tricks, but it kind of feels of like spend more time with your phone and do not disturb, and watch how much that changes how you feel on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, simple little things that can compound over time. And yeah, it's important to give context to that you've worked with therapists before, and this isn't therapy,
Mhm.
and I'm not a therapist. However, someone coming in, because I've had a lot of clients who have worked with therapists before, and that's actually provided a really good base of like, great, like I'm aware of my thoughts, I'm aware of like certain things from my past, but now I'm looking for something a bit more deeper, kind of that next level of healing, but also that next level of I really want to take action. I just don't want to talk about these
Right.
things.
And I felt
Uh,
like it was so much of the talking piece. Like, I do really believe I
yeah,
walked into this experience very self aware, but I almost felt like too self aware because I was like, I know these things about myself, but if I do want to change them, like, what am I missing on actually having them change so that I can not only feel different, but like feel the full
yeah.
spectrum of emotions?
Yeah, that's actually super important because many people who are watching this, or many other coaches, people who have been doing the work, they're very self-aware. And it's like,
Mhm.
why am I still struggling? Why do I feel like I'm still suffering, even though I'm so self-aware of why I do the things I do or why I think I do the things I do? And so why don't you talk about how you came in with maybe this self-awareness, but then what you realized about being so in your head and disconnected to your heart. So maybe talk about your experience in the actual container of these sessions, which is the expansion experience is this experience. It's the experience total of the 6 months and our time together, but also it's in the actual session. So why don't you talk about how that container was for you in comparison to maybe things you've experienced before?
Sure. So I'd love to give like a specific anecdotal example for this because it came at the right time of us having spent several months working together already, that you just asked me one question and I was like, "Oh, like of course, like this is why I feel the way that I do right now." So I recently went through a bit of a breakup that really just kind of rocked me because it was very much taken by surprise. And when I was going through it, I was very grateful to have you as a resource. And the best way to describe like what we're doing inside of our sessions is we hopped on Zoom this day and it was the first time we were talking about it face to face, had been texting back and forth about different things and how I was feeling. And as I was describing to you, like what actually was going on, the first question you asked me was, "Hey, I'm noticing that like you're tearing up a little bit here. Have you actually just given yourself the space to cry?" And that was what we did for a few minutes as we talked through it more. And I would be the person in the past who would not do that. Like, who would just be like, I need to just like move on to the next thing. I can't feel this way. And even in the first few times of us having conversations and like really getting into what are these deep rooted beliefs that I have, mostly from my past, mostly from childhood, I would have moments where I didn't expect to cry, but I just did. And it was helping me release things that I was holding on to that I didn't even realize I was actually holding on to. So, a lot of what people refer to as some of that inner child work. Well, what does it actually look like for somebody listening to this and wants to know what the experience actually is? It was you guiding me through these visualizations of picturing myself at different points in my life. And it doesn't even have to be when I was a little kid. One of the other sessions that we did that really stands out in my mind was actually taking myself back to when I was in that depressed state that I described and had canceled my
Hmm.
wedding and was trying to navigate next steps of what I wanted to do with my career, and having this internal conversation with myself that you helped me facilitate by asking me certain questions, asking me to tell that version of myself specific things. So it's like you're there and you're guiding it, but the best word for it is like facilitation because it's still me talking to me and me creating the space for me. And I wasn't allowing myself to like feel those types of things. Like I just kept convincing myself like, "Oh, you need to move on to the next thing because that's the way that you're going to get over this faster or distract yourself with something else." And then I would also judge myself a lot for having certain distractions and things in place. So something else that I feel was very different with working with you versus other types of support I've had, with therapy being an example, is you spend a lot of time like challenging me on my word choice
Hmm.
so that we can be really clear about, well, what is the story you're actually telling yourself here based on the words that you were using. So one of our sessions looked like you asking me to say something differently a few times over because I was making comments of like, I should do this, I have to do that. And then you posing the question to me of like, well, how does that sound if you say, I want to do this or I get to do this? Is there a different intention behind it? And then from there, just to kind of close the loop on what I was mentioning about the accountability piece and like being able to continue these practices outside of the sessions that we're actually having together, I think it's very helpful that you include in your practice to set intentions at the end of our conversations of how do you want to go about the rest of the month, the rest of this week, the next 2 weeks, whatever it
Yep.
is. and writing them down and talking through them, and then starting the next conversation and session we have together. Hey, let's check in on these. Like, how did you do with these intentions? Are things going well? Are there areas that you want to focus on a little bit more? Did something else come up for you? And as I describe this, this is exactly the same principle as what I hold my clients to from a nutrition perspective, in getting them to do things like tracking their food, getting them to monitor how consistently they're being in the gym. But this is more from like a place of things that if you asked me 6 months ago, I would have told you I didn't know how to measure them because they didn't feel that tangible. And now I do feel that they are actually tangible, because I can tell you that I don't feel as connected to myself if I have a few days in a row. Like, as we're recording this yesterday, I had a really busy day of doing a bunch of client check-ins, and I did a couple of podcasts, and all of a sudden it was like 4 p.m. and my office that I sit in my apartment doesn't have any windows. So I was like, oh my gosh, I have to get up and I need to just like be done with my day. Whereas in the past, I would have been like, nope, I have these 7 other things on my to do list. I need to get them done tonight. Like, they have to be completed. I would have beat myself up about that. Whereas now I look at it and say, if I just do this other thing tomorrow, I will be better off because it will feel better. I'll probably get it done faster and I will feel more productive. And I've also just been able to like really let go of like certain pressures of like timelines and deadlines, which I think can be
Yep.
tricky as an entrepreneur because you have to create those for yourself. So there is that other side of it where you can swing a little further in the other direction of being like, oh, I'm going to be all like loosey goosey with those things. And I will say that's probably like the next phase of something that I'm working through, because I want to be able to have the duality for like both the structure and the space for that flow.
Yeah, yeah, which is really important that you just talked about there with the masculine and feminine of because business is masculine. No matter what you say, business is
Mhm.
masculine just in the structure of it. It has to have this certain structure and this and the action for it is going to be a masculine energy, but you can bring the feminine into that, which you could say is going to be a bit more flowy, right? A bit less structured, but how do we balance those two? And so I'm glad that you talked about the accountability and how there's always these touch points in between our sessions, right? The sessions themselves are these like deep dive checkpoints, right? It's like spiritual insurance. It's like
Mhm.
you're gonna have this session, you can come and talk about whatever it is, that you're gonna be able to probably release and feel into whatever you've maybe been ignoring, right? Because I love that you talked about how one of the biggest things was just hey, have you given yourself space to feel what you've been avoiding? Because I mean, this is actually I would say I don't want to say toxic masculinity, but the over masculine society has created this thing of, well, if you just keep doing more and you just keep moving, then you'll move far away enough that like you won't need to feel those things. And that's not how your body works. That's not how your heart works. It's going to be there. It's going to come out at some point, whether it's years down the road, whether it is manifested into unconscious habits because that energy is still there. It's looking for a place to release. And so you'll constantly be wondering, well, why am I still struggling with this thing? So, well, did you feel the thing that you felt all the way maybe from when you were a child or the thing you've been avoiding because you're just doing so much instead of allowing yourself to be? So I really appreciate you mentioning that because that's part of the importance here is getting so present with yourself that everything that is already there, all the wisdom and potential that's always been there, the love that's always been there, can be created in that moment. And yes, that means some tears. And it's kind of like I think about when I was a personal trainer, I it's kind of like you want your client to hate you, just like
Yeah.
they curse at you because the workout was hard. It's almost the same for me, whereas it's not that I want you to cry, but I know by you going into those depths and feeling whatever painful thing you're feeling in that moment from the past is you doing the work. And there's I can't speak highly enough for anyone that does this work, and especially you, Krista, because it is difficult, but it is necessary for our evolution. Because as you do that, right? What happens after that? After we do like a really deep dive session and like it's heavy in the moment. How do you feel after it?
Yeah, I think the part about it being difficult but also very important is just so key to highlight, because in the immediate after a session where we've done that deep work like you're describing and I've shared, I feel lighter and I feel better, but that's not like a forever feeling. It then actually challenges me to like continue to process those feelings and those thoughts. And sometimes I feel really heavy for like the entire rest of the day, but it's not in a negative way. It's just like, oh, wow, like I processed a lot of these things. And now I'm going to potentially be tested in other areas of my life, personally, professionally, any kind of interaction that I'm having with someone, to really see if like I'm aligned in what I'm saying and doing and being with what I uncovered that I'm looking to potentially change or just be more connected to about myself. And I think like when you think about like meditation, for example, a lot of people will think about it and say that, like, oh, yeah, like meditation, like just makes you feel like lighter and just like after, or even after a really good workout, like you're just like, oh, I feel so much better. But that's only this like little like instant, like post instantaneous like piece of it, that then the real like work is whatever comes next, in thinking about like how you're going to face the next challenge that might come up and use it as an opportunity to show yourself that everything you uncovered in how you're feeling and the stories that you may be holding on to, like, okay, here's your chance to rewrite that for yourself or do something different or change, and then see how that then feels next.
Yeah, 100%. And there are three key pillars in the expansion experience in this container, and that's heal, integrate, and embody. And so heal, as we talked about, is that kind of going back into the past and healing all the parts of us that need our love, the inner child work. And then integrate, which is like after the session, integrating these lessons, integrating the love, and then the embody, which is coming naturally through who am I inspired to be, and then being that. And so I'm curious if there are any key moments that you can reflect on these last 6 months where you did integrate the lesson, like you were tested,
Mhm.
and because your relationship with yourself is different, right? Your relationship with your thoughts and your emotions are different now, and your relationship to your business, to other people, to the world was changing because you could now decide, how do I want my relationship to be here? So I'm curious if there's any moments that you remember where you had those, you were tested after a session. You're like, okay, well, I'm seeing this differently, whether it was a conscious choice or you just kind of approached it differently unconsciously, actually.
Sure. So there's a few, and a lot of them are pretty recent too, which I think is cool, because it's like I've had this time to really pour into a lot of this work, maybe a little bit in like isolation, so to speak. And then I opened myself up to new opportunities, conversations that I just felt way more confident navigating than I would have 6 months ago. So, on the professional side, recently, and I had mentioned this to you before we hit record, in the last like 4 to 6 weeks, I've had several clients who were up for renewing for our program, and several of them just didn't want to. And it was the place that they were coming from. It was difficult for me as the coach because truthfully, I knew that I wanted it more than them. And that is a hard thing to separate when you really care about getting people this end result or getting them to this next step that you know could totally change your life and you know that they're capable of. In the past, I would have a lot of imposter syndrome and start to convince myself that by them not wanting to renew, there was something wrong with the program. There was something wrong with me, like I wasn't qualified as a coach. But I've been able to shift my perspective to be able to say there's actually lots of things that can come out of this. One, it's making space for new people to come inside of our community and really serve them. Two, I have plenty of other evidence and like my logical brain, like really looking at this of where the program works so well because we have so many other clients that are really happy inside of it. And then three, to not only integrate, but like embody and really kind of take it to the next step. I'm also not super quick to say, like, oh, there's absolutely no changes we need to make to our program. I use the opportunity to try to figure out, like, what can my assistant coach and I be doing to better get in front of those people before they like completely fall off? And how can we look at our processes and say, like, how can we allow that person to walk away knowing that we did everything we could for them, because that is so important to the values that we have, and like knowing that we want to help these people get those results. And with that then as well is like the financial piece of me being able to say to myself, that's not a reflection of me in
Mm.
terms of my worth, that like, oh, I couldn't get these people to stay for longer. I couldn't get them the results that I know they're capable of. So that obviously then means there's some revenue that's walking out the door. And if I don't have that same revenue coming in, I'm a bad person. Like I truly would believe that in the past that like I wasn't enough. And that was like the big message that I really uncovered in doing a lot of the facilitation with you of like talking to younger versions of myself. And realizing that like chasing the next dollar sign was still not going to make me feel that way, because well, yes, like I can objectively look at it and say, hey, I have certain expenses to pay, I have certain bills I want to look at. I don't go into this like panic mode now. Like I've spent, it's, we're coming up on a new quarter, and I've spent the last 2 days like really also looking at, one, where can we focus in business to bring in new clients that are the right fit and a great fit for our program. But then two, like where can I look at my own expenses and see if I can change different things? And I think something that's really big for me with that from the professional side is, in the past, if I felt this way, I would be like afraid to
Mm.
go have conversations with people if I needed help with something. Like if, I have a contractor that I'm working with, let's say for my podcast, like reaching out to them and just being like, hey, my budget's kind of changed with this. Like, here's what I'm thinking. Like, how can we make this work? In the past, I would have been too afraid to do that because I would think I wasn't good enough because I couldn't like meet the original agreement that we set. Whereas now I look at that and I'm like, just do yourself a favor and have that conversation. Like, it's not a reflection on you. The reflection on you is that you're being responsible and saying, hey, this is what I need. I want to continue working with you. Like, how can we figure that out and make that work? And I also think that's so important from the embodiment perspective, because when I am talking to a potential new client, that's what I'm asking of them. If we have the financial conversation, it's like, hey, how can we get creative on this together to make this work? So if I just retreat and turn around and like don't lean into the support that I know would be helpful for me, how could I expect to attract people who are going to do the same exact thing? So that's like kind of like an incidence on
Yeah.
the business side of things. Do you want to add anything to that, or do you want me to go into the personal stuff?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I hear is just a lot less shame and judgment, a lot less judgment towards yourself. Like you're able, whereas before maybe there was a lot of judgment towards you and you were reflecting, oh, my business is just reflecting onto my worth. And now what it sounds is like you have a much more secure attachment and relationship with
Mhm.
yourself instead of this anxious attachment to your business or avoidant attachment to your expenses or your bank account. And now it's just more secure. And so you're able to actually use logic and use reason and use your actual ability to, all right, let's like create, let's figure this out. Like let's be creative, which creativity can happen from anxiety and anger. It's a different
Mhm.
kind of creativity. But that's what it sounds like. A lot less judgment, a lot less shame, much more secure in yourself. So much more secure in your relationship to your professional life as well.
Definitely. And I also think too, like this with the security piece, and this probably even goes back to some of what you were talking about with masculinity or even like toxic masculinity. I think something that was hard for me in the past was I had this perspective of like, I have to be so independent. I have to do these things by myself. And that was also met with like the cultural narrative of like no one's coming to save you. And I've never wanted to be in like this like victim kind of mentality. But it swung me so far in the direction of like this hyper independence to where I was actually like pushing away the people that did want to help me and would help me if I just asked, but they didn't know that I needed that help or needed that support because I didn't want anyone to know. Like I wanted to show myself like, oh, like I can do everything on my own. And it's like, that's yes, that's an important confidence to be able to have, but that doesn't mean you have to do everything on your own. And it, in a way, like I wasn't actually really as grateful as I can express that I am now for the support that I do have in my life.
Yeah. And that's sometimes that doesn't show up until, right, you get present with yourself enough of like, hey, I don't need to be in this kind of constant masculine energy that's like, I need to be independent. I can do all myself. I'm just going to take action, do more. Instead, I can actually receive. So, what I'm hearing there too is your ability to receive from yourself and from other people has improved.
Mhm. Definitely. And that's something that I know will also be important in my personal, specifically like romantic relationships too. Because as I mentioned, like in recently going through a bit of a breakup, when I was inside of that relationship for a couple of months, I did have moments where I actually felt a little bit tested because the person wanted to do things for me that were like, they're seemingly like small things, but I recognized that they made me uncomfortable. And I was like, oh, this is like an opportunity for me to lean into this, to see what that feels like, to allow another person to do this for me, because it also actually made me feel good when they did it. I just hadn't experienced that, not only because maybe I wasn't with the right person, but also because I wasn't allowing someone else to do that for me either. So that's been really great for my growth too. And, just like keeping with that same thread of the personal life aspect and how I've noticed a difference in myself in going through the last, like, I would say like 6 to 8 weeks of navigating a breakup that was, like I said, a surprise, kind of abrupt, and just the communication was not there at all. I, one, learned how to, like I said, actually just let myself feel the feelings versus being like, nope, I need to move on. Like, I just have to, like, I'm not allowed to be upset about it. Two, spending less time though, like over analyzing, oh, I should have done this differently, or like thinking that I did something wrong, because I think that was a big default for me. It's like I caused this to happen, or like I have to be the one to go and fix it, and also go like fix this person.
Yeah.
And that's always been really blurry for me because, again, if you're listening to this and you're a coach, you know what it's like to naturally want to help people. And that can creep into your romantic relationships in a way that, like, you're then not actually being the best version of yourself and being supported, because it's pulling on more of that anxious attachment versus the secure attachment. So I have found that when this person in this situation in particular came back around, I had a much easier time expressing exactly what I was looking for and not judging myself if they're just not the person who can do that for me. Like
Yeah.
actually hearing, if they're not coming out and saying that, like listening a little more closely for that versus, and also just observing it in their actions or lack of actions, but also recognizing that, like, it's not my responsibility to try to get them to like see themselves in a certain way. And for as much as I might have had this connection with them in certain aspects that I really did like, that is such an important piece because I have worked on being secure in myself. Like, I want the same thing in my partner. And also knowing that, like, we're going to go through those ups and downs, right? And like, sometimes somebody else is going to need to be a little more supportive, and then you vice versa. But like, both of you have to be willing to do that. Like, you can have a good connection with somebody, but that doesn't mean that they're ready to be in a relationship. And that's something that has, I feel like, I don't want to say I've like learned the hard way, because I think the only way to really learn that is to go through those heartbreaks and actually then spend the time figuring out why that person wasn't the right person for you.
Ooh. Let's take a moment. Take
Yeah.
a second to really hear what she just said, which just her saying that shows a tremendous amount of growth in realizing I had to go through this to learn this. And so even though it was difficult, it was perfect in that way.
Mhm.
That's big. Because how many times do people stay in that victim mindset of I'm a victim to circumstance? I'm a victim to circumstance. And what I'm hearing is that you've completely saw through that. Even in the moment, it was difficult, and we're, you were getting triggered. But
Yeah.
as we talked about, it was kind of like perfect. Wow, actually, I'm actually excited that this thing is happening right now to you because these things are coming up, inviting you to say, "Hey, are you as embodied and integrated in who you thought you were, who you say you want to be, who you say you are?" Right? Here's another opportunity for you to open up your heart to get closer to love because, right, when it's easy, it's easy. If everything
Mhm.
was going well, and they were just not being tested at all, you're just like, oh, great, like this is super easy. But being tested like that, one, again, your perspective of it just shows me how much you've grown because you could see it like, yeah, like these things actually great. It showed up, it didn't work out, and allowed me to learn more about myself, more about how I want to show up in a relationship, and more about what to see when I'm in those beginning connection kind of phases, right? And what to hold on for myself, right? Like knowing who I am. So next time that anxious attachment is even less.
Yeah. And I also think on top of that, especially if like any women are listening to this in particular, I feel like there is such like a cultural expectation around like finding your partner is like this like pinnacle like that like defines like it's like this pursuit that like you made it once that happened to the point where I think there's like a lot of shame in loneliness. And what I've learned in just allowing myself to feel this full range of emotions, like we're talking about, has actually also led me to recognize that in comparison, the feelings that I've had of this person not showing up for me in the way that I was showing up for them and the way that I want my future partner to show up for me actually feels so much worse than being lonely anyway. So it's like for what, right? Like why try to force something when you know that like you being more connected to yourself, like I actually wouldn't say I feel lonely. Like and sometimes I do. Like and that's why I want to address the fact that like it's important to acknowledge like feeling this full range of emotions for sure, whereas I kept as I've kept saying like I would just push those things down or try to convince myself that I wasn't upset even though I actually was. Whereas now it's like I actually like spending time with me and I enjoy spending time with myself. So I look at it like whoever else is going to come into that, like I really want them to add to that too, versus me feeling this like anxiousness of like, well, when are they going to text me back? When are we going to make plans? It's like, don't wait, like go live your life. Like, because chances are when you were like everyone says, like, I don't like being the person who's like, oh, it'll happen like whenever it's supposed to happen. Because as somebody who has gone through as serious of a breakup as calling off a wedding, the one of the things that I just like really hated hearing at that time, I would have people that were like my parents' friends, and they'd be like, oh, it's not a big deal. I was engaged. And then 6 months later, I met my husband. So that's probably what's going to happen to you too. And that used to just like grind my gears because it made me feel like there was still this expectation for this timeline of like, oh, yeah, well, like now that you made this big decision, then the next phase of your life is like totally going to happen quickly. And it's supposed to happen however it's supposed to happen, right? And if you are clear on what you want for your life and how you want to spend your time, well, then realistically, that person will show up inside of those environments too, because hopefully you got some stuff in common, right? That you both enjoy doing. So that's been
Yeah.
my perspective shift around this idea of like being alone. Like it doesn't have to be this negative thing per se. Like it doesn't have to be associated with oh, there's something wrong with you, or even that there's something wrong with other people, because that's something else I feel like you and I have spent a lot of time talking through and I found really helpful is just having the perspective of also you being male versus female in these conversations, and like you giving me that perspective has been helpful. But seeing how like sometimes if I talk to certain like girlfriends about it, there's this whole like, oh well, like this is happening because like all guys suck, and like I don't believe that, like, and I don't want to put that kind of energy out there. It's just like, okay, maybe you had these couple of experiences where you feel like these few people like aren't the greatest. But for me, I've always internalized that and been like, okay, well, if this is happening to me more than once, like I am the common denominator here. So why am I attracting this in the first place?
Yeah. And that's taking personal responsibility right there for your life. Again, not being a victim,
Mm-hmm.
right? So beforehand, that was maybe more of the mindset a little bit, right? More so like, I need these external things to happen in these ways for me to feel this way. Instead, what's happened? We've worked through of, I want to feel this way. And
Mm-hmm.
so let me work through the things that are stopping me from feeling that way. Boom, I'm feeling that way. Great. What do I want from this place? What can I do as well to cultivate more of those feelings, the feeling of joy, the feeling of connection, the feeling of fun, the feeling of play, and you going out and creating that in your own life without waiting for someone to come into your life for you to give yourself permission to do those things. And so then when someone comes into your life, you already have that connection with yourself. You already
Right.
have these cool things that you're doing with you. And there's that opportunity to invite that person to try those things as well, to show, hey, like here's this special thing that I've been doing for, the last year or the last couple years or my whole life. And, there's that beautiful intimacy. There's like a deep connection, right? I would say relationships are when you really connect on those like little things that no one really knows about, but you do it all the time. And it's just something that you do. And you maybe don't tell anybody or very few people. And it's those little niche things that you do that you can share with another person. But if all you're doing is focusing on the external to give you what you're looking for, then you might not even have those things. Because I would say those things are expressions of you. Of you're just like, I'm gonna draw in a coloring book because like that, you know, because that brings me joy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or I'm gonna go on a bike ride on the boardwalk by
Yeah.
myself because that brings me joy. Or I'm gonna go to this like workout class, or I'm gonna go on the beach and read this book, or whatever it is. So it's exciting to hear how that has changed for you over these last 6 months. And so where would you say that, like right now, you are at in terms of your self-love? Right? Compared to 6 months ago, at the beginning of this year, right? Because a lot of this work is expanding out of fear-based operating and into love-based living, right? We're expanding into love, our
Mm-hmm.
love. So where would you say your self-love is at now in comparison to what it was in the beginning of this year?
I would say it's like quadruple what it was before, in the sense that not only was I operating a lot out of a place of fear, it was also out of this place of like, I need to prove all these people wrong, which to your point is like the external. And that energy is still useful because it got me to a point where I was more financially secure. I had been living with my parents for a while. I really wanted to move out. It gave me the ability to do those things. But I knew that like that wasn't really like who I was. Like I didn't want to be bringing this like fu energy to everything that I was doing. Because if somebody asked you, like, I think back to like a lot of my clients that I coached group fitness classes with for a long time. And one of the things that people would always say to describe me was that I was like this very bubbly, like hype person. Like I'm the ultimate hype person for my friends or for people that I support, care about, whatever. So everything I just said about being like, let me prove people wrong, that's like the exact opposite. So there was a disconnect there. And I think that, you know, it's not something to say where like every day you wake up and you feel like, oh my God, I just love myself so much today. I still have I catch myself like saying things to myself that I'm like, wait, I don't want to talk to myself like this. So I
Mm,
think the other piece is like I'm able to change my narrative much more quickly. And that's allowed me to continue to prioritize doing things for myself too. And also not feeling like, you know, you brought up the example of going to the beach, bike rides. Like the other piece of that for me was I had this fear of if I go take the 30 minutes to do that thing, like that's time that I should have been working. So, like, oh my gosh, my business is going to explode. So, like, having this time to see that my business has been really steady has now given me more confidence to say, hey, like, I'm at a point now where, like, I know that essentially if I were to do nothing, and am never not doing nothing, but like if we were to boil it down to like the bare minimum, here's where I would be. And then, hey, what can I do to support myself to like have the energy if I want to like turn things up a notch, right? And like
yeah.
really lean into certain things, like looking at routines differently. I think something that I am way more aware of now is, for example, like what am I doing with my time right before sales call? And how am I like prepping for that? And I used to never pay any attention to that, to the point where now, because I feel like I'm more connected to myself and that self love is higher, it then allows me to approach the conversation with the person of like, I just want to get on this call with this person and like see how I can help them. Like, even if we don't wind up being the right fit for each other, I just want to see how I can help them. I literally this morning, it's the second half of the year. It's a new month. It's the first week of a new month. And I have messages with people that I've been talking to for months about potentially like working with them in a coaching aspect. And a lot of them I've reached out to in the last 2 days just to be like, hey, I've been thinking about you. Would love for us to get on another call. Do I want them to be a part of our community? Of course. But I'm doing it from a place of just saying, like, I know we had this conversation like 3 months ago about your goals. I want to know how you're feeling about them because this is an opportunity for me to support you. And even if that only turns into like a couple suggestions of whatever we may be messaging back and forth about, okay, like that's fine. But that's how I continue to like build those relationships and have those connections. Whereas I think in the past, if I was at a place of not having as much of that internal love for myself, I'd be like, I need to go get X number of new clients to like prove to myself that I can love
Yeah.
myself more.
Yeah. That's huge. Whoa. Anyone else can relate to that? Any other coaches, entrepreneurs? Compared to where it's at now is coming from this place of service. Like actually, right, we hear that come from this place of service, but like that doesn't happen until you're connected to that love within you, until you're pouring into you. So it sounds like you've been pouring into yourself, and that natural byproduct of that love is how can I help? How can I be of service? Yeah, who needs my love right now?
Mhm.
It's much different
Absolutely.
energy.
And also pouring into myself too in terms of like the physical aspect. I know we touched on this a little bit and me saying like not compromising on my gym time and things like that. When I think back to the last 2 years, if I was in a place where like I wanted to hit a certain goal, I would like cut that out of my routine. Whereas, like I said, I've been able to come up with ways to like kind of do both sometimes and be a little more productive with it in that way. Whereas now the way I look at it is like me pouring into my physique and creating that time in the gym for myself ultimately does fuel my business because I'm living out the habits and behaviors that I'm asking for our client community to uphold for themselves too, and not seeing that as like one versus the other, because that's something I don't want for myself to like maybe make like steps forward from a financial perspective. But again, like I said at the very beginning of this, like at the expense of like how I feel, how I look, my own confidence, all the things that my clients struggle with too. grateful to have gone through it. And like we were talking about with things being perfect and like you have to experience those things, I think it makes me a better coach because like I genuinely know what it's like to struggle with that. I don't think that if you've never had any challenges around your weight or your physique or anything, it doesn't mean you can't be a great coach. But I do really feel like I can empathize in a different way and am honest with that about that with my clients, like on a day to day basis. Like I will tell them if I'm not having like the best week ever, like last night, we did a group coaching call and we were really trying to communicate to our clients like if you want X result in a certain timeline. So let's say you wanted to lose like 5 pounds over the next 6 weeks. I showed my own tracking and lack of consistency to demonstrate, hey, this is not going to get you there. And I'm showing you that I've fallen into that too. Like, we're not looking for perfection. And it's not always a matter of having more knowledge because I technically have more knowledge than all of you. And I still didn't necessarily show up to the degree that I know I could. But what's going to help me move through this? Looking at that information and choosing to not be frustrated for no reason because I have the info to show me that like there's gaps and there's things I could have done differently. There's different decisions I could have made with like going out to eat or, those types of nuances. And then compared that to a client who was clearly seeing better results because she was showing up and doing the thing every single day.
Yeah. And wow, I would say that's a testament to your leadership because it's being able to show, hey, I'm not perfect and it's not about being perfect. And even showing by example of that is a lot different than like someone who has been, yeah, I'm perfect with everything. And I've always been perfect with everything. Whereas you can relate a lot deeper with your clients. And that's honestly how I feel as well. Because I've been open to you about my past and where I've
Yeah.
been. And part of the reason why I'm doing this work is because I know what it feels like to be so disconnected from our love and to not love yourself. Like I'm the poster child of that. So much shame, so much judgment, experiencing depression, anxiety, fear, living my entire life in that. And I'm not perfect. I still get triggers. I'm still walking the path, but it's just walking that path that's the most important into coming back to the love that we are. Because as I love me, that's loving you. And as you love you, that's loving me. And we're all connecting back to source and like what we actually
Mhm.
are, which is a lot more powerful than the ego wants us to believe. And with that, would love to know what you would say as well to anyone who's listening to this that is thinking about coaching, who wants to dive deeper into the emotional, mental, and spiritual work on themselves, who feel that they have that incredible potential, but there's still some things holding them back. Maybe they're a little bit still in some self-sabotage and they just want to really deepen their self-love and they want to kind of get to that next level in their life and move through this season with love instead of fear. What would you tell that person?
I heard this, I forget where I heard this quote from, but I did like a little series up until my 30th birthday that I think a lot of the work that we did together has helped me kind of like summarize and reflect on like my last 4 or 5 years in particular. So I did like lessons of like basically things I've learned over the course of my 20s, and I did one every day for 30 days. And one of the ones that I had heard that I think is so great is you don't have to believe every thought inside of your head. And I think what's hard is if you don't have that outside support, it's so easy for you to believe every thought inside of your head. Because if you're a coach, especially if you are an online coach, you can go through days where you literally do not talk to anyone besides your clients. And maybe you're like texting a friend or like a family member. But what if that person, like, you don't have the relationship with them or like the timing of it or whatever to like get deeper on like, hey, this thing's coming up for me and this is how I feel. You could have the great relationships in your life, but you might not have the space to be able to like talk through some of the things that are coming up for you And so it's so easy to actually continue to believe all these thoughts inside of your head, right? And I think for me, like if I was to give anybody that advice of like, if you want to get out of that, you got to look at the same things that you may be preaching to your own clients. If you happen to be a coach or support people in that kind of way, is like, if you're not living that out, like what can you expect back from them in return? It's like you can't have any kind of level of frustration towards them if you're not also holding yourself to that standard too. And I think like the best way to really work through that in a way that's positive versus judging yourself for that is to have this type of support to just be able to do it and just like actually say what's on your mind. Like we have something like, what is it, like over 80,000 thoughts a day or something like that. I forget what the stat is. I think for women, it's even higher. It's like close to like 100,000, which
It's
is
it's
insane if you
it's some
actually think
absurd
about it.
number.
Yeah. So imagine if you go through your whole day and you really don't talk to anyone besides conversations that you may be having where you're like servicing your clients and it's like really more about them versus you. Even if you don't like think like journaling or something like that is accessible, like that's been something that's totally changed the game for me because I'm like just dumping out the thoughts that I've had at the end of the day because getting them out of my head has allowed me to actually just like work through things a lot more. And I always knew that there were benefits to that, but I knew that I also would it would be more helpful for me to have the accountability to actually do that too, to now feel confident to continue to do that on my own as well.
Yeah. And if anyone wants to get in contact with you, maybe ask you some questions, where can they find you? Where can they
Of
ask?
course. I'm on Instagram a lot, as I mentioned about running a business from your phone. So you can DM me on Instagram at the Krysta Huber, and I do spell Krista with a K and a Y. So I'm sure when you post this, you'll have it linked. But I'm more than happy to answer anybody's questions about anything with this experience and working with Oliver. I seriously can't say enough about how helpful it's been. And it's really cool when you start to see how it impacts all different aspects of your life and like the other people that you get to meet and be connected with as a result of it too is really amazing.
Beautiful. And obviously you can send me a message at Elevate with Oliver, as well as my email, which is oliver.phelan@gmail. But thank you again, Krista, for believing in yourself and having the courage enough to go into the Colosseum and gauntlet of your own emotions. Because I say that this work is for everyone, but not everybody is for it.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
you step through the door, you open your heart to it, and I appreciate you for that.
Thank you.
All right. Catch you guys next time. Peace.